and I'm here with Ricky and Roxanne. Ricky is the in-house promoter at the Joiners. He is Mr. Joiners, and Roxanne is a booking agent for ATC Live. So hi guys, how's it going?
Hello, doing well. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
going,
doing good as well. Sunny day in Paris, so it's nice.
Very nice. Yeah, well, I think we're all very jealous of you, us Isle of Wighters, and me and Ricky over in Southampton. So I think there's going to be quite a few people here watching today and watching the recorded version of this who are at different levels in their careers, so to speak. And I think it's really cool that we've got Ricky, who's obviously more of a local promoter, and Roxanne, who deals with acts nationwide. And I think there's going to be definitely some similarities between what both of you guys do, and also some big differences. So firstly, I wanted to talk to you, Ricky, and I think everyone here is going to be from the Isle of Wight. So as an island musician or band, there is definitely I don't want to say a mystique, or people on the Isle of Wight see the Joiners as the holy grail of live music. And it feels like if you get off the Isle of Wight and get a show at the Joiners, it feels like they've made it. And I just wanted to say, and I say that completely seriously, it's definitely a mantra that lots of people have. How has the Joiners, built up this legacy, so to speak, throughout the years?
I think it's got a major part to play in, because the venue's been there 52 years, obviously. It's because it's sustained, like Southampton's music scene's kind of sustained because of the Joiners. So everything that the Joiners does, it kind of revolves around, the whole music scene in Southampton. So when you've got a name that's kind of internationally recognized, such as Joiners, because of the bands that have played there, I mean, when you list off the things that were, when it really started taking off in the early 80s and into the 90s, obviously with, the Charlatans and Oasis and Radiohead and Arctic Monkeys and Muse and Green Day, and you can literally list all these bands off that played at the Joiners. So immediately it's like, holy, these are some of the biggest bands in the world, and they've all headlined, Glastonbury and things like that. So it just puts, Southampton doesn't have a lot going for it, as you kind of know. So it's like any smaller town that's got something that's attached to a wider industry, such as, those huge named acts. And it still exists. It's very hard to run anything for 52 years. Well, it's 53 years now, but the last year's obviously been null and void. But it's got to succeed at some level. And I just think we just do everything with a lot of passion. We don't really treat it as a straight up business. Everybody that works there just has to love it. And it's like, it's a passion project. None of us are making millions or we make a livable wage. So it's just something that it's always about finding the new act and bringing the names through before they become an international recognized band or act or whatever.
And how do you do that? And I think Roxanne will ask you this too, as a local agent or a booking agent fully fledged. How do you almost preempt who's it worth getting in this year before they go on to play the big top of the Isle of Wight Festival or something like that? Or how do you know who to sign to ATC Live? How do you kind of figure that out?
It's always a gamble in a way. Like, you never know in advance how it's gonna be. Sometimes you love a band and you think like it's the best thing you've heard in a long time, and nobody cares. So it's hard to know. But we have someone at ATC. We have a guy called Bertie, who's our A&R, and he's knows everybody, talks to everybody in the US, in the UK, all around the world, and to get the hot tips and so he knows which band are the people of the industry talking about, and then every week he reports and make us listen a list of new stuff. And so that's one.
Well, that's definitely a major advantage over something that Ricky you might experience. So is it kind of all down to you, checking out new bands and maybe support tours, acts on the support of other headliners?
Yeah, it's a different process for me, because it's like there's literally two of us who do everything. Like we're doing 275 gigs a year in Southampton between, 4 or 5 different venues. So it's like we rely on agents such as, Roxanne and ATC, and we work with so many different agencies and agents that there's so many bands to choose from. It's, as you say, it's incredibly hard to figure out, but you kind of have to have faith in an agent, and you have to have faith in, people that you have working relationships with that are like, oh, these guys are going to be releasing an album. They've got coverage on Six Music. They've got, videos coming out, what they've got in terms of PR and who's managing them, and like what the rest of the roster looks like that agent's looking after. As Roxanne said, there's tons of bands that I absolutely love. There's a band from Belgium called Balthazar who's absolutely amazing, and they do really well in Belgium, sell thousands of tickets, and then they come to somewhere like Southampton and they sell like 50. So you just don't know with these things. It's especially for a starting point like the Joiners, because it's a small venue. You have to sometimes it's a case of we bring bands from Canada or Japan, and on the first time they can play to 20 people. Like a band like Pup, for example, could play to absolutely nobody, and then 2 years later it takes off and they're doing 2,500 tickets in London, and we're doing 800 in Southampton. It's kind of a guessing game, kind of not, but it's down to there's certain factors that come into it. It's like the quality of the music, the record label that they're on, the other bands that they're touring with. As you say, like if they come through, a lot of bands come through on a tour support first, and then they will gain some fans from that headliner's audience, and then we'll bring them back at a smaller venue. And then it's not a case, no band gets huge in this day and age, like immediately. There's building blocks to it. So it usually happens over a 2 or 3 year course.
Absolutely. So I think, as someone who, has played the Joiners, been to many shows at the Joiners, I think I've seen something in Southampton, Ricky, and I don't know whether for you it's a case of preempting and kind of trying to predict, or whether it's something that you've built, you say Pup there, or a band like the Menzingers, or something like that, bands that, or Front Bottoms, bands that you've brought up through, maybe playing a house show at first, and then having them back in the Joiners in front of 100 people, and then obviously they come on, and I saw the Menzingers last year in February, obviously in Southampton. I don't know how many people were at that. Do you know?
600 or so, but like that again, that started. They're a band from Philadelphia. Nobody knew them. They played upstairs at a club night when we first started with them. I can't even remember how many years ago, but it's with American bands, they only tend to come over when they have a new album. So they'll come over once a year, do a run, but it's very hard to even get a lot of those bands you mentioned, because Southampton isn't like London, it isn't Bristol, it isn't Glasgow, and it isn't Manchester. We're not like a main music city for touring. So we have to really, it's even harder for me as a promoter to kind of prove Southampton is a place worth touring. And that's worth tickets, and people will come. So it's really fun though when bands make it.
It's a bit complicated for American acts, because they usually come over for 3 weeks, and we have to fit like the UK and Europe in these 3 weeks. So that's not that we don't want them to play in Southampton, but sometimes we just don't have enough time.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting to have you both here and show both sides of the coin, because I think it's interesting, if you're going to take a punt, so to speak, on a band coming through, whether it's a local band or an international band, they're also taking a punt on you as a promoter. So it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so essentially what Roxanne said, if there's not enough time and the band only want to do 7 days in the UK, then they're probably going to want to play the 7 main music cities, right? They're not going to want to go to Southampton.
What would you say they are, Ricky, in the UK, the 7 main cities?
Well, you'd be lucky if now bands would do 7 because of COVID, but usually it's only like 5 or 6. So you get like Manchester, Bristol, London. Brighton is ahead of us. Glasgow always gets shows. Leeds always gets shows ahead of us. So there's kind of like an A, B, and C like list to it, and Southampton's probably between B and C. But sometimes we outsell Bristol. but it's very rare. It just depends on the music scene. If the music scene is big enough, then agents will want their bands to play here. And so, you know, if people go to shows more in that city, then you'll get bigger bands come through essentially. So that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, on the flip side of that, you know, Roxanne, when you're picking, so as you're, you know, as Ricky says about maybe an A, B, and C tier list, when you're booking a tour for, say, you know, an artist you look after, say like Los Bichos or Goat Girls, you know, one of those artists that you look after, is that how you work? Do you have a, you know, we want to hit London and Manchester and Leeds, okay, so we'll get them in first and then we'll move down, or is it a little less cutthroat than that?
It's a bit different for like Los Bichos or Goat Girl because they're based in London, so they can, you know, it's easy for them to play in the UK, and if we do a UK run, we're gonna do a proper like 10-12 days run, like, so we can cover more cities. But yeah, for American bands, like indeed, we would usually do like 5 shows in the UK. So like it's definitely London, Manchester, Glasgow, Bristol, Birmingham. We do quite a lot there, and Brighton, I'd say. But even, you know, even in North, like we rarely do Leeds plus Manchester plus Liverpool. Like we pick one of the 3, and we, you know, we think like for the next run that they'll do a different city that they haven't played. But
so how does that translate, do you think? So let's say, you know, there's some guys in here today, you know, in maybe DIY bands who want to book their own tours. They might not have a contact in Birmingham and Leeds and in Liverpool, as you say. So do you pick one, you know, as you say, even as a local or an English band, do you pick one, you know, one up north, then you hit London and then you hit your hometown? Do you think that's a good way of doing it? You take that kind of a little less intense approach when you're just starting out, you know, take what you can get. And if you can get 4 or 5 dates, then that's a good start. And that's to both of you guys.
I'd say, you know, like you got to look at the figures as well. So maybe, you know, like look at where the likes on Facebook come from, which city. I mean, if, you know, you have 2 likes in Birmingham, maybe it's, you know, but you have 20 in Southampton, maybe you'd rather play Southampton than Birmingham. So we would look at figures as well. Like we can usually access like all the Facebook data, the Spotify ones as well. So we know like how many people listen to what in each city. So it also gives an idea of like if, say we don't know what to choose between Manchester, Liverpool, and Leeds, we would look at all these figures and say, okay, there's more fans. It seems that there's more fans in this city, so we're gonna go for this one first, and then we can, you know, try a festival in that one. So it's gonna bring a bigger audience for the next run and build it like this.
Is that similar for you as well, Ricky?
What did you mean in terms of like
statistics and like looking at figures, or do you kind of take a bit more of a gung-ho approach?
The thing is with that, we can't access, as a promoter, I can't access the analytics of a band's like Facebook page, so I can't see where they're liked, and I can't you know, see where their following is and stuff. So again, it kind of relies on the agent or the management they have that data, and then they would come to me as a promoter, say they had more likes in Southampton than Portsmouth or Bournemouth, and they wanted to choose a South Coast show, then they would come to Southampton. But regardless of that, I tend to try and book stuff that is just good, that's, you know, which makes sense, because there's so many bands now because of the accessibility of recording and the accessibility of being able to put your music out there compared to like the 90s and 80s. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of bands. It takes so long to filter out, you know, between the good and the bad and the terrible stuff. As a promoter, you know, try to figure out what's actually worth tickets and what's going to do well. And there's a lot of time, like sonically, I'll book stuff because I think it's amazing, and you know, it won't sell tickets. example is like Andy Shelf. I booked Andy Shelf, and then a year later he got a Grammy nomination. There was 12 people at the show, and I'm just like, do you know what I mean? You can't really win. You can't really win. It's a lot of it's to do with timing. A lot of it's to do with, you know, PR and things. If the bands have, you know, press coverage, if bands get on like Six Music or Jules Holland, you know, the main kind of music outlets that educated music people watch, then we'll try and get those bands. But yeah, it's not an easy job.
Would you say for you, Roxanne, it's similar at like an agency like ATC? You know, I think as someone who plays in a band and people who are watching will relate, you know, if an agency like ATC said, you know, sign on the dotted line, we'll look after you, it would feel like, okay, cool, it's sorted. And is it not that simple? Is it still, you know, you could take it out on the road and it could flop?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess it was a bit different a few years ago, but I feel like for the past few years, and especially now, there's such a strong UK scene. And, you know, it's a lot of bands doing also similar stuff musically that would compete against themselves like all of the time. So if there's, you know, your competitor that has signed on a bigger label and has more press than you, or whatever, a lot can happen, even if what you do is amazing and the music is great and the live is great. Like sometime a festival would rather book the other one just because, you know, it got more press coverage or so, yeah, it's hard to know in advance.
Yeah, for sure. Go on, Ricky.
I was just gonna say it's sometimes you'll get things that take you by surprise as well, where you like book something and you think it's small and then it sells out. So it's like sometimes it's literally like throwing, you know, you're shooting for the moon with a lot of these bands and artists, the same as an agent is, as I am as a promoter. You want them to do well and you want them to sell as many tickets as possible, but you can get two bands that sonically sound the same, but one's like selling 10 times more tickets than the other, and you can't figure out why. And you're like, well, why is this fan base not crossing over into this field? And a lot of it's to do with, PR and the spread of information of that band. If they don't have enough backing, or they don't have, you know, the right connections to get on the right Spotify playlists, or the right coverage, people just don't know who they are. So then it is down to the promoter to try and educate people and be like, look, these guys have done this, this, and this. But, you know. Yeah.
I think on the flip side to that, you know, you say there's bands. Oh, David's got a question. We'll go to this because I was just going to say we want it to be as interactive as possible. So if there is anyone else who wants to put, you know, what you're up to in the chat and make it more relevant and ask these guys anything. So we're gonna go to David. David says, what does the touring world look like now in a post-COVID world? Would love to know your predictions and how you're preparing for it.
Do you really want to know? Are you sure? What we're discussing at ATC at the moment is we aren't too sure festivals are gonna happen this summer, even in the UK. There are some scientists saying that there might be another wave in the UK in the fall, which is not good news. So we are still hoping and planning tours between September and December 2021. We have booked backup plans for most of these in 2022 as well. And for like Europe, I don't see it happening this year at all. We just started the new lockdown in France a week ago. For instance, they are talking about closing down schools, like because it's still not closed. Like it's getting really bad now. Like basically what happened in the UK in December is happening at the moment in Europe. So it's gonna take another 6-7 months to get us out of it. So yeah, basically we want to keep tours in 2021 because most of the artists we work with just want to play shows. They're really desperate to play. So we're hoping we can do some stuff in the UK, like starting in September. And yeah, for Europe, we've rebooked. We've announced shows, and a lot of them are on sale. But we've prepared backup plans for all of it in 2022.
And Ricky, what about you and the Joiners?
Well, at the minute, we're still on track. We're doing seated gigs again from May. We have we've put in a few shows for standing from June, but realistically, I mean, the government's just I think the government's just trying to make themselves look better than they are by just shouting these dates. I don't think they're realistic. The Music Venues Trust are doing tests in the next 2 weeks, indoor tests with the government. So they're on site. So they're going to be tracking how COVID moves and things like they've been doing in Spain and Germany and stuff as well before. But there's some solutions to it. There's meant to be UV air conditioning, which can destroy basically 99% of pathogens and things. So whichever route the government decides to go down, whether it's like people have to have COVID passports to get into gigs or festivals or whatever, or whether realistically they have to open it gradually. So they'd have to start like small capacity, like the Joiners. They can't, this is the thing with festivals, they can't just suddenly open Reading and Leeds and let 100,000 people into a field. It has to be tested. Like it has to start small and the risk has to be minimal for the gig goer. You can't put people, as much as they want to go into you, the risk is too high for the spread. But for us, it's, and a lot of the venues in England, we really need to be open by autumn, or we just end up back in the same loop that we were a year ago. And would have to source funding again. Everybody would have to crowdfund again. And it's just like hitting a big reset button. People's jobs are like dependent on the gig scene coming back. So, but we've got sold out shows in July. So if they happen, they happen, but it's all literally down to the government. It's out of our hands. It's as much as the problem is for people like myself and Roxanne, we plan gigs up to a year in advance, right? And if we don't have a date to work towards, we can't plan anything. So it just makes our jobs extremely stressful. But I'm staying hopeful personally, but it's testing, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing a few. The first live talks for Soundcheck have been today, but we did a few pre-recorded ones. And I spoke to Justine Jones, who runs Church Road Records, and we had a really good chat about it. And we were speaking about how it's just complicated for absolutely everybody. But she did say that she's found people have been very generous throughout COVID. I don't know if it's any trends that you've seen, and perhaps not as likely with gig tickets and things like that. But have you seen, people, I mean, obviously the artists are desperate to get back out, but, artists on ATC and gig goers at the Joiners, have they been, desperate to get back out and throw their money at some gig tickets or?
I think, the people have been quite supportive, like keeping the tickets for like, I don't know how it was for you, Ricky, but for us, like usually when we've moved, like there are tours that we've moved 5 times now, and people tend to keep their ticket and anyway, and like to, I guess, also to support the whole, the band, the promoter, the venue, and stuff like that.
Ricky, you launched some Joiners merchandise and did a bit of a crowdfunder. How's that go? Because I've seen, you did some hats and things like that, and people seem to have absolutely snapped them up. So how's that gone? Has that been a bit of a lifeline, or is that just something like fun you wanted to do while you're sat around?
Yeah, no, it's totally been a lifeline. Before, I would never have time to start a merchandise range or like a launch or anything, but I think it's incredibly important to stay creative and stay connected to the audience in some way or another. Obviously, with terms of support, like your last question, most people have, you know, if gigs got cancelled and things like that, they donated the money to the venue. They're like, I'll just keep the money, which is nice. But we're now starting to get to the point where, like Roxanne says, some tours are pushed 5 times rescheduled, and the customers are just getting infuriated, and they're just like, just give me my money back. And it's not us, obviously, it's not, but we're the ones that take the brunt of it, because we're the people, you know, there has to be this medium of us spending all this money to promote something that's not going to happen. It's quite a big risk. So the merchandise side of it is really fun, because it's, you know, I'm working with a lot of illustrators and freelance graphic guys and things that we've worked with on tours for tour posters and things in the past. And they make a bit of money, because obviously they're not making anything, because there's no tour posters to create, really. Well, there are, but not on the level of what it was. So we're just trying to keep all the people that we're just trying to all look after each other in some way. But yeah, the merch is flown out. It sells out every single time. And in turn, it's kind of become its own role. Like, so when we come back and do gigs full time again, I'll have to employ somebody just to do the merch, because I don't have time to go to the post office with 100 parcels every time. But it's something that's kept me busy. It's something that's kept me sane, and it's a really fun thing to do. Actually, it's an avenue that without COVID happening, I didn't think there would be a lot of money in it or anything, but it's helped prop the venue up quite a lot, which is really good.
Well, that's really good to hear. You know, for artists, you know, I want to go back, Ricky. You said earlier that there's probably 100,000 bands, you know, that you have to go through and separate the good from the bad from the terrible, to quote you. For, you know, young bands watching this and young artists watching this at a grassroots level, like you, Ricky, and then moving up to getting signed by an agency and maybe being looked after by someone like you, Roxanne. What can you do to impress? Because, you know, loads of bands come over and either, you know, from the Isle of Wight get the gig at the Joiners and think, oh, that's it, all we need to do is rock up and play. And, you know, and similarly, you know, they get the contract from ATC and they think, oh, cool, we've got an agent now, this is easy. How do you, as a band, how do you get yourself in that position to start with, that someone like you, Ricky, will think, oh, you know, I'll take a punt on them for support tour, or someone like you, Roxanne, will think, you know, we could offer them something. And then also, how do you nurture that relationship and make it worthwhile after, you know, you do it once and it might not go very well?
Yeah, I would say if you're a small band and you want to get a gig and you know, the pedestal of the Joiners in your local city, obviously every city kind of has a Joiners, so to speak. But it's more about good communication. Don't DM me on Instagram and ask for a support. Like, that's really annoying. Use the proper channels to reach out to the venue or the promoter, like use an email, send links for everything, and make sure you have proper recordings. Don't have really bad phone recordings. That's like annoying. Just kind of, you know, just be positive and be professional is one of the main things. It's like, you know, I know you don't really have a handbook for how to do anything, as you say, to be a band, but if you turn up and you get a gig, turn up on time, be punctual, be polite, don't turn up hammered, and don't ask to borrow all the other band's gear. There's things like that, but it's just a case of just kind of getting your ducks in a row at a grassroots level, and just being nice and communicating. It goes a long way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you're in the door at the Joiners, you know, or someone like Roxanne, I don't know, and do you go to gigs to watch, or is that an A&R job and you just get given artists, or do you go and do that yourself?
When we can go to gigs, we usually go see the band before we sign them, if we can.
So when you're there and you're at the gig and you're watching them, is there anything, you know, of course you're looking for a great show and blah blah blah, but does it matter, for example, obviously everyone's trying to run a business here, so, you know, if there's 4 people in the crowd but the show's absolutely blinding and you love it, are you like, oh, okay, you know, I'm gonna actually get involved here and try and help this band, or do you have to take a step back and be like, oh, you know, I loved it but you're not quite ready yet?
It would it would really depend on what's around. Like, if the band has something recorded that's ready to be released, if there's a label, if there's a manager, like the whole, if there's a team or not. There are some bands that have seen like a year before signing them, just because also sometimes it's too early, and it's better if the band is like, or like the audience grows organically in a way, and sometimes it's it's better to wait if it can be too early to have an agent, I think. But if there are 4 persons, but I absolutely love the show, I'd sign the band anyway. Everybody has to start somewhere. So
yeah. And what about you, Ricky? Maybe for artists maybe coming over from the island to support at Joiners, obviously ignoring COVID, but something like that. Is there anything you look out for? Sure, obviously, if a band is on a support and they bring in 30 people, you're gonna think, oh, I'll have you guys back. But aside from that, are you gonna take a punt on someone? If you just love the tunes and you think, God, I want more people to see this, maybe give them a nice support slot on a bigger show where they don't need to shift so many tickets.
Yeah, I think it's like a happy medium of both those things. Like, it used to be, other older promoters used to have this old pay to play system, and they even had it before I started at Joiners, and I kind of came in and was like, we're getting rid of that, because it puts too much pressure on the bands to like forcefully sell an amount of tickets or you can't play. Like, and my go-to with it is that everybody should be promoting the show equally. And I think once you do the show, and outside of the band being good on stage and things, that you see they actually make an effort to promote it online and things. There's a lot of bands that you book, or local bands, that post once. It takes like 1 minute to post the thing across the social media, and if you go on and you check as a promoter and you see they've only posted about the gig once in like 3 months, you kind of have to go, okay, that they're not taking this very seriously, but it's a case of, if they bring people as well, that's fantastic, but it's got to be a culmination of all the things. That you could have like the best band in the local band in the world, but if they don't tell anyone they're playing, then people aren't going to show up. It's not really that hard. The idea of a local scene is there's 4 people in a band, everybody brings 2 or 3 of their friends, that's 15 people. And then you do that 3 times over with 3 other bands. That's 60 people in a room watching, 4 different bands that they wouldn't be usually watching. So that's the whole idea of what a local show is supposed to be. But I think everybody kind of needs, I've discussed this before, that there needs to be some sort of Microsoft PowerPoint for local bands, where they just get given a thing that says this is the minimum that's expected of you to promote alongside the venue. Do you know what I mean? It's, because a lot of times the band always argues the venue and says, well, you're the promoter, so you do all the promoting. And I'm like, well, you promote with us, so we can't hit your fan base because your social media is controlled by you, not by us. So you just got to help each other to make it as good as possible. It's not it can't really be an us versus them situation. Everybody needs to treat it as like a combined effort sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something I wanted to ask you both, because I think there's going to be people here, who are just starting out watching, and some people who have maybe been plugging away at something for years. It's a question that, I think about a lot, and I've never actually asked a promoter straight up. So here we go, the big moment. Is something, is an artist for a agency like ATC or a venue like Joiners doing stuff DIY, perhaps for a few years? Let's say an artist has been booking DIY tours since 2017. Will an agency like ATC jump on that and think, yeah, cool, we're going to go for this and help these guys out? Or is it kind of like, oh, they've been doing this since 2017, they're still only playing 100 cap venues? Is there a view for artists to, scrap what they've done already and start again brand new?
I think, if it would be like since 2017, I mean, it's just 3 years and it's fine. We would think that for bands that have been around for 10 years and that, you know, never grew or have the same, keep playing the same venues and stuff like that. But I mean, it happens really often that bands like are in the DIY, you know, stuff for a few years, and before, you know, they sign to a label or they start working with this manager and they want to, you know, get their career to a next step. I mean, that's actually, you know, good that they're doing this DIY stuff, because it means they're building the audience little by little.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you know, the job, our job has started kind of like with this stuff already. So it's
and do you think, you know, it's attractive to say, you know, they've already got gigging experience? It's not like they're gonna suddenly be put on some decent tour and make a mess of it, that kind of thing.
There's even bands that we keep in the DIY stuff and don't announce we work with them. Like I remember we did that with Black Midi, because, you know, they were really young and they kept playing like Windmill and venues like that, and it was selling out like in a few hours. So for a while, like, we had started working with them, but we weren't announcing because we wanted it to stay like in this DIY world, like, for a start.
That's really interesting. I had no idea that was a thing. And what about you, Ricky? You know, if a band's coming through and trying to get a show with you, do you keep that kind of thing in mind? Are you thinking, oh, you know, you've already played 4 shows with me, you know, over the years, and none of them have been that great, or do you, you know, keep taking chances on bands throughout time?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep taking chances on bands, because it only takes like the one song to get noticed, and, you know, then they can take off and do whatever. I always kind of cite the Biffy Clyro model. Like, Biffy did, you know, 3 albums and they toured in a van for 8 years before anybody really cared who they were. And then, you know, the 3rd or 4th record, they signed a major deal, but they didn't want to sign a major deal because they just stayed in that kind of indie DIY touring route. And then, you know, a couple of years after that, they ended up becoming huge and playing Wembley Stadium. So it's not, you just can't give up on people because they've been around longer. I understand the whole rebranding thing. I mean, that's what we did with Creeper. That was essentially a rebranding thing from Our Time Down Here, and Creeper are essentially the same thing. But Creeper had been a band for, Our Time Down Here had been a band for 5 or 6 years. So everything, they were trying to get an agent or get management and things, and they were like, oh, we think you've kind of been around too long. So they rebranded the whole band, you know, disbanded that, and they got a couple of different members, but essentially it was the same songs that were written for that band, but then they became Creeper songs. And then, yeah, they were rebranded as a new act, and then they started again from the bottom, which was where they were at the end of the life cycle of the other band. But then it took off because they were seen as like a new thing. So sometimes it works like that, obviously. But then there's bands that, you know, play the Joiners 10 times and never sell it out. And then on the 11th time, magically 200 people show up and it sells out, you know, so it's all to do with timing and things. Like, some music, it comes out before it's popular or people are into it, a certain vibe or a sound. And then if you've already got that sound, and all of a sudden the math rock or post-punk becomes really popular, then you've already got this catalog of songs that's there. So, you know, it depends. Music comes in waves with things, doesn't it? Like, that's with audiences.
No, yeah, that's really, really good. I think, you know, there's going to be lots of people watching who, you know, yeah, like I say, they might be in a position where they've been plugging away for a little while, or they might be brand new. Let's take the impression now that they're ready to maybe book a DIY tour. And I think this is going to be really interesting perspective from both of you, because Ricky, you are more in a DIY scene. And Roxanne, maybe you can give a bit of more professional insight, professional tips and tricks that ATC might use, like you're using your analytics on your Facebook page. I would have never thought of that those type of things. So, you're in a band, you're ready to, hit the road and book yourself a tour, small venues, maybe a few DIY shows. Is there any integral advice that you can give, or tips and tricks that you want to share?
I would look on like a tour of a similar band or size, like just to see who they've worked with in terms of promoters and DIY promoters and venues, and I think I'd just look up like what the others are doing, and I'd reach out to like DIY local promoters in the cities. Mainly, I would say when you reach out, as Ricky said, like it's good to have links, a picture. My other advice would be not to write a gigantic email, just a few lines, like, or enough, because we receive 1,000 emails per hour, and if like just the image of a big text, I know I'm gonna be less likely to take the time to read it, just because it's scary.
Yeah, and Ricky, what
stuff like that.
Yeah, and Ricky, what about you?
Yeah, I would say the same. Like, don't send massive emails, because we all get millions of emails and they take forever to read, and we can't stay awake 14 hours of our eyes, reading emails, but it's a day. I would say advice for bands is also not to release too much at once. I think local bands will like write an album, go into a studio, and then just put it out without even thinking about it, and then just nobody knows it's even out. So I think there's an element of building hype that you can even do as a local band. I think the best thing is to start off with like a single, try and build a fan base from that, get a good recording, go to a proper recording studio like the Ranch production house or whatever, go to a place that's got attachments to like the proper music industry and things as well, if you can, obviously, if you can afford it. Then release singles and then an EP. Just have like a slow build. I think a lot of bands, local bands, want to run before they can walk with things. I think it's important to pick the shows that you want to play, not to play too much. If you're playing every 2 weeks in your city, then it just becomes like watered down. To show up at other people's shows as well, and go and watch bands that you love in smaller venues and hang around afterwards and have a conversation with them, and create a relationship. And this is what I've said to bands like yours, Leo, and other bands. You become friends with these other bigger touring bands, and then eventually they'll be like, oh, we've got this slot that's opened up in the city that you're from. Do you want to open up on it? Do you know what I mean? A lot of it's about relationships with other bands and things. Being out, as you know, and being able to jump on to, if you can get a slot with a bigger band because you went to a couple of their smaller shows 2 years ago, then, there's things you can't pay for. You can't buy onto these things at this level. So it's like, it's just kind of being part of the music community. If you're in a band, you need to go to other people's shows as well. It doesn't have to. I know local bands get really competitive, which really annoys me, and they should all support each other instead. But there's a lot of friction between them because everybody wants to make it. So I think, the important thing is go and support other shows and support other bands.
Yeah, I think, I think on the local level, I think you make a really valid point, and I think I've done this, and I think I know loads of people have done this on running before you can walk, or trying to run before you can walk. I think lots of people fall victim to that. So on the topic, I was talking about DIY touring. If you don't know any bands in Manchester, if you're from Southampton or the Isle of Wight and you don't know any bands in Manchester, is it worth sending a cold email to a promoter and saying, can you stack this show with some locals and let's go and make this happen? Or is that just a complete waste of time and money? And, ultimately it's just a nice post to share on Instagram and 4 people are at the show. Or is it worth doing that and slogging it out on the road?
If you've never played and have no idea, I'd say, the best would be to try and find a support slot. So at least, you have a first play in the city and some people have seen you and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Ricky, is there anything you want to
Yeah, I would concur with Roxanne there that it's. I think bands think they can just roll into Manchester. Like there's bands in Southampton that could do 200 tickets or 300 tickets, and they go to Manchester and play in front of 9 people, because they want a headline. And you got to realize, like nobody knows you. So what the idea of a gig swap with a band is a massive thing. So you can make friends with a band from Manchester, have them support on your show in Southampton, and then you go up to Manchester and play in front of all of their friends. So my advice would always be to try and make friends with a band in that city, especially at a smaller level, and then just go to their crowd, and just gig swaps is a massive. Before you email a promoter in Manchester who's just going to be like, unless you sell 30 tickets, I'm not going to put you on. But it's really hard for a band for Southampton to do that if they've never been there. So I'd say go down the band route before the promoter route if you want to play in a different city.
Cool.
There are also there's always a lot of old dayers in many cities, and that's a great way to start as well, I think.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, Roxanne, can you explain what an all-dayer is?
These would usually be on weekends, so like Saturday or Sunday, and it would be like an all day long sort of mini festival in a venue. So yeah, it's usually like the 3 first bands would be local or like smaller ones, and then the bill like grows, and there are a few headliners. But that's a really good way to start. We use these a lot for the artists that we just signed, so people would find out about them in other cities.
Cool. All right, no, that's really good. We've got another question from the chat, and again, this is my time to remind anyone watching, if you do want to put a specific question in the chat, please do. We're coming up to the last sort of 15 minutes of chatting to these guys, so now's your time. I'm sure they'll be up for anything. No question is a bad question. David asks, would love to know the speakers' background, how they got to the place they are now, what major successes and failures. Is there anything either of you would like to share on that?
Do you want to start, Ricky? Or
you go first.
Why do you start? We'll start with the successes.
Background first, I'd say.
Okay, yeah, go for
it. So it gives me time to think what I'm going to say. My background, I studied, I guess university works differently in France actually, but I actually, after high school, I moved to London and lived there for a year. I was just, going to shows every night and working in a clothes store during the day, pretty much. But it was a great time, and I met a lot of people because I was actually going to shows every day. Then I went back to France. I studied communication for 3 years, and after that I studied cultural event management, pretty much. That was 2 years, master degree. And after my first year, I had to do a 6 months internship. I wanted to go back to London real bad, and I tried a lot of stuff, but I never managed to find like a place actually. And just one day I saw this ad for an agency that was working with a lot of bands I loved, but based in Paris. And I had no idea what a booking agent was actually at that time. And I had an interview. I met Clémence, who I still work with today. And like she explained to me what a booking agent was and what was the job. And yeah, I literally had no idea it existed.
Wait, she explained it to you in the interview?
Yeah, I didn't know. I just thought like, oh, I love these bands. Like I'm gonna go. Like I don't know. I guess I wasn't sure what was the difference with a promoter, and also because it's a really British job for some reason. There's no booking agency in France, really. I think we're the only one. Anyway, we started working together like this, and I had to go back to university for my second year, but I could do like part-time. So that's what I did. I was part-time working with her, part-time at university. And yeah, I was really lucky because right after uni, I had a job already. So at the time we were working for ATC was another company called Elastic Artists, based in London as well, but it was just the two of us in Paris. And 6 years ago now, I think we've moved to ATC Live. Elastic Artists doesn't exist anymore, so we had to find a new home. And yeah, that's it for background.
Cool, Ricky, just before you jump in on that, Alice has asked a question, and I'd like to get to that first. She asks, do you have any tips on booking a job as a touring crew member? She's looking at different jobs in the music industry, and that interests her the most. That's to both of you. Like working can you clarify, is that any capacity, Alice, is there anything in particular, or is it just getting on a tour, in any capacity?
I would say if you want to get on a tour in any capacity, is to be around other crew members at shows and tours and things. So when you're at a show, speak to the merch person, speak to the engineer after the show. Probably don't ask for the tour manager because they can be scary. Try and speak to maybe if they have crew at the end of the show and they're packing down. There's a lot of times where people want to do the same thing as what you're saying, and people will hang around at the venue after the show and just speak to people and become friends with them. And if an opportunity pops up, you can get it without being previously skilled, without being like a lighting engineer, or without being a front of house sound guy or girl. It's you can get merch jobs. I've given loads of people merch jobs through them asking me as the promoter if they know anybody who wants to do merch on a tour. We do that all the time with things. So it's just a case of getting involved, really. I wouldn't say there's anybody you could like email or anything like that. I think it's more of a case of if you want to work for a particular band or particular genre, is to go to their shows and talk to them, really, and just offer yourself up and be like, I'll help you load out all of this stuff for an hour and a half, for free. Everybody works for free at the beginning as well, because it's just kind of the etiquette of how the music industry, there's kind of on the ground stuff. I worked for free for quite a few years before I made a single penny, which is pretty wild looking back on it.
Yeah, I think Alice, I know I'm not speaking, but I was at a show at the Joiners that Ricky booked with an artist called Stella Donnelly. And I just hung out after the show. I was just drinking a beer, and I saw the band members packing up, and I just went up and it's like, oh, your keys solo in this song was really cool. And then the tour manager chased me out of the venue and was like, oh, we've got the show in Brighton. We've got loads of guest spots available. Do you want to come down? Just because they had guest spots available and they wanted to fill them. And obviously they appreciated, just me saying, not well played, basically. So I think, yeah, that's pretty priceless advice, because something could easily come to something like that. Worth volunteering then. Yes.
That's also like how I got a lot of the bands that I've worked with, like the bigger bands and stuff, and big American punk bands that I would usually have no access to. It's the same way I got jobs working in production at like Grows Rock Festival and things like that, was just through being friends with other people that, I did some interviews for a magazine that I used to self-run. I used to be so obsessed with certain bands that I started my own zine. I actually started from a press point before I started as a promoter. And then they were like, oh, you could speak a lot of the Flemish and Dutch guys that worked there and things they couldn't communicate with the American bands. So they were like, can you run around and make sure everybody gets on stage on time? And I did that for free for a little while. And then they ended up paying me. And then I went back for 11 years in a row. But then through that, I ended up meeting bigger bands. And then I was like, hey, I do shows in Southampton. Do you want to come and play? And then it's like, you know, it's all just about access, really. Things, you know.
Yeah, Roxanne, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the whole industry works a lot with a network. So, you know, like, if someone reached out that we don't know, we would always like ask around, like, do you know this person? Either it's a tour manager or a promoter, or like we would chat internally with people at ATC, or I would ask, you know, a promoter that I work with a lot, let's say in Leeds, if he knows like of this venue or this guy. Like, so yeah, it's really, the more people you meet, like, you know, the better.
I think as well, to add to that, from my perspective too, as like a local band, you know, from the coming over to play a show like, play at a venue like the Joiners from the Isle of Wight, lugging your gear onto the ferry and then playing the show and then having someone stand with your stuff, and you hopefully have a few t-shirts to flog as well. If one of my friends, Alice, had said, oh, you know, I'll come do your merch and help you, like, that is invaluable. You know, the answer would never be no to that. So I think if you know anyone in bands or anything, yeah, definitely hit them up and ask them that. She asks, could social media work to connect with people? Due to being on the island, venues and shows, there's only a few to go to.
Not really. I mean, because, you know, people like I personally don't like professional stuff going through social media. I'd rather like that it would come via an email for sure. Yeah, I don't know. That's my point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the same. Social media is social media for like friends and family and things. It's not really for professional things. It's better to go down the correct avenue. Otherwise, you know, you'll probably get ignored and it will be disheartening. So it's just put the extra effort in to try and find a direct contact, use LinkedIn and things like that. And then you can reach out to those people directly, and they're more likely to respond. Like, it's some people see it as offensive or, you know, intrusive to find them on their personal social media and then start talking to them about what they do for a job. It's like asking someone at Tesco's how, if you've run out of meal deals or whatever. But I get it as a promoter all the time with tickets and things, but it's yeah, it can be annoying. So it's better to find an email or something.
Cool. Well, look, we've got a few more minutes, so if there's any more questions, like anything at all, we're obviously happy to take them on. So anyone here who wants to dip in, Alice says thank you very much.
Leo,
and if
there was a question earlier on, I think you missed. Will said, when Alice asked about getting jobs in the music industry, in the live industry, Will said he has the same question, but is there any advice on working as a session musician? I'm guessing as a touring session musician.
Sorry, Will, I missed that, mate. Yeah, go on, guys. You can go ahead if you want to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, all session musicians that we have working with our bands, they are friends of the bands. Like, it's always been like that. So I can't really answer that question.
Yeah, it's the number one thing would be, if you want to be a session musician, you have to be absolutely incredible at your instrument as well. And you have to have performance skills or previous, you know, performance skills or touring experience, because session musicians a lot of times in touring bands get paid more than the other members, because they're so good at their instrument and they're so reliable, and you know they know exactly what they're doing, and they can literally they can learn a whole set in, you know, an hour. So it's if you want to be a session guy again, but yeah, you have to usually know the band or have an in. There's not like another avenue to do that.
Cool. Well, look, that's time. So if there's anything else anybody wants to add, questions wise, I think that's probably all we got time for. But Ricky or Roxanne, if there's anything you guys want to say. No, that's cool.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone. Don't give up. I know COVID is harrowing and disheartening, but it will get back to normal, hopefully.
One day. Roxanne, anything else?
Yeah, well, same. Good luck, everyone, and you know, keep believing that it's gonna get better very soon.
Well, thank you guys very much. That was really, really fun.